I got French cleats on the wall and a lot of crap on the floor. Let's make some shelves. Okay, so we're gonna build one of these. This is a corbel, however they're pronounced. Anyway, shelf's gonna go on top. I have some plans here. This is the first thing I've designed here. I had to go through a couple iterations because I don't plan well. But basically, these are all 1x2s. Whoops, 1x2s. The surface four sides things that you can get at the box store. These were leftover pieces from that playground thing that I built. Basically, I got this one cut to 8 inches. You can see on the plan. Top one here, 13 1/4. This one I cut to 13 1/2. Then there's a 2-inch tall cleat that goes here, and a 1/2 inch 2x4 foot sheet that I trimmed down from the pile back there. Then once they're assembled, I chop the end off. This was not originally intended, but you'll see why once we get them up. When that's done, it's up on the wall. I stick this little bit under the bottom, which kind of wedges it in place, and then I put a screw in there. Now that eliminates the purpose of me like being able to lift and take it off, but I don't want to take these off. And I can just pull the screw out and take these off if I want. But that'll give me a little bit more stability. That's the idea. And then when it's all done, I then stick it back in the saw and chop the end off. You can of course change these dimensions to fit whatever cleats that you put on. Since this requires power tools, we're gonna go to voice over me and fire up the saws. So the first thing I'm doing here, I'm taking those 1x2s and I'm cutting them down to the sizes that were in the plans. Now it's not entirely critical that they be perfect. I don't really have the saw set up perfectly, so nothing's gonna be perfect. The way I have it designed, like 1/8 of an inch one way or the other, is not a big deal. But especially the diagonal one is not a big deal. I'll show you why in a little bit. But err on the side of, making it slightly too long in that case. Now this next part is a little bit tricky, at least for me. So I'm taking the horizontal piece and the vertical piece, not the diagonal piece, and screwing them together. I'm trying to get them close to 90 degrees. Now to get these not to tear out, I've been using these this countersink bit. It's like a drill bit with a countersink thing put on it. You can just get that at a hardware store. It's nothing fancy about the bit. And to hold it square, I'm trying to basically just hold it square using the insert thing from a combination square. This is not ideal. So you can get jigs to clamp things together, or any number of things designed to hold boards together for this very task. I have a couple of things that you can put clamps on that I 3D printed. You can just get that stuff off of Thingiverse or whatever. The problem is I don't know which box any of those are in right now, so I kind of have to get the garage set up to get the tools out and organized so I have my tools so I can better get the garage set up. It's a unfortunate circle of life going on here. But with a little bit of care, you can get it at least semi-close. And you should also keep in mind, I didn't cut stuff for one of these, and I'm not screwing one of them together. I'm making a dozen of these things, so I'm putting up a bunch of shelves. So if you want to save time, do that. You can see me holding up the diagonal piece there. The angles on that, I originally intended to go with 30 and 60 to get the angle piece a little more, a little more horizontal, a little less vertical. But my miter saw here only goes to 50, so I went 50 and 40, which didn't quite work out to the plans, but it'll work out in the end. If one side's 50, the other side's 40, as long as the angles add up to 90, then they will work as the hypotenuse. The side opposite the 90-degree bend in a triangle. Man, geometry was a lot of years ago. So because I cut these diagonal pieces a little bit long, I start by cutting one end at one of the angles, either the 50 or the 40. I think it looks like I'm doing the 50-degree angle here. You get one of them kind of as close to the end as possible, then I measured it, flipped it around, and would do the other side on all of them, the 40-degree end. I think the way I did it, I ended up getting one of them right with the first one of these supports I made, and then I used that as a template for the rest of them. But it's important to cut one side first, then measure, then cut the other side at the other angle. Where I should cut them. Screwing the angle piece on was equally strange. It kind of sat in there nicely, but I kind of just eyeballed center, and then I would drill with the same drill bit with the countersink, put one screw in one side, then I would flip it around, hold it the other way, drill the other side in. I wouldn't drill both at once before putting in one of the screws because I didn't want it to shift and then they don't line up. So drilled in one, put in a screw, flipped it over, drilled in the next one, put in a screw. That seemed to work out. I didn't end up having to re-drill any of these, so that process clearly worked okay. Then when I had them all sort of cut and screwed together, I held them up to the wall to see just how far down I wanted these things to go, marked it with a pencil, and then chopped it off with a chop saw. Keeping in mind, I wanted it to stick below the 6-inch cleat a bit, so I can put that extra little bit underneath to lock it in place. See, these will be locked in place on that top cleat. Then using the first one that I cut there just as a guide, I cut the rest of them, just one right after another. I was being really careful with screw placement and where I'm doing the saw cut to make sure I didn't saw through a screw, because that would probably screw up that saw blade pretty bad. I don't even think this is technically a wood cutting saw blade. I think it's for laminate floors. It was a saw blade that was in it. As for the top, what you don't see is me cutting the tops down the sides. So they're originally 2x4 feet. I needed the 4 feet width. I didn't need the 2 foot. So I cut them down on the table saw to 16 inches. And same for everything else. Pre-drilling the holes is really important here to stop things from tearing apart. This is cheapo Home Depot plywood, or it might be Menards plywood. It doesn't matter. It's not great plywood. And it's really important, I found, to pre-drill holes in the cleats. So I'm attaching these through screws through the top, which will go into the top of a cleat, which is kind of screwing in between the layers of the plywood. And even with pre-drilling, I got some splitting in the plywood. Not enough to wreck anything, but enough that it really annoyed me. The process here was kind of like before, drill one hole where you want it, put in a screw to hold it in place, and then drill in more, put in more screws. I attached the cleat to the back of the shelf first, then flipped it over and attached the supports to the cleat and the shelf. So I didn't do the support first. Definitely had to start with the cleat. I found it really easy to line up the supports on the shelf and cleat with the cleat already in place. The flat top of the board made it stand up pretty nice, and it just kind of slid nice, and I could hold it against the cleat while drilling, again drilling and putting in the countersink screws. I still use the countersink bit because I found sinking like a countersink into the cleat and the 1x2, it didn't matter which one, allowed me to just kind of screw the screw in nice and gentle like, just with a manual screwdriver. Didn't use any big power drills for this part. Then with everything attached, it was just, stick it on the cleat and stick on that, I pre-drilled the hole in that locking support and then put in the screw to lock it in place. I found it pretty nice. Like I can really shove up on the bottom of it and it won't push it up off the cleat. It's holding it in pretty nicely. I know everyone told me these French cleat things are really strong, but they're really strong. I'm really surprised how tough these things are. And then it was time for the test. I don't really need to have these up on the shelf exactly, but I threw up a bunch of big heavy things on the shelf and decided to test it out, stupidly by shaking it directly above my head, which is a brilliant idea. Also, I tried doing another couple of pull-ups until I bumped my head on the bottom of the shelf. There, now they are up. You can see how they're installed. They're pretty sturdy. I ended up cutting these to 16 inches deep. I ended up having a couple of offcuts. They became the next bottom for that, 2 pieces together, it still works. And putting that much stuff up there allowed me enough floor space to cover the floor with more junk.